and those who are joining the press conference virtually. WPA continues to believe that everything must be done by GCOM and the relevant stakeholders, including the political parties, to ensure that the imminent national and regional elections are free and fair and free from fear. No stone must be left unturned, and all aspects of the electoral machinery and process must be addressed with the seriousness they deserve. Because our elections determine who governs in a winner-take-all system, which confers on the winner almost absolute power and relegates the loser to a state of powerlessness, GCOM must treat all concerns with the utmost urgency and meticulousness they deserve. It is against that background that WPA welcomes in principle the feasibility study being currently considered by GCOM. Having said that, we have some concerns. First, any serious feasibility study should have been prepared by an independent source rather than the chief election officer, who does not enjoy the confidence of the full commission and all of the political parties. Second, the report of the study emphasizes more why the necessary reforms, especially as they relate to biometrics, should not be adopted. In particular, it cites cost, time constraints, and reliability of the proposed system as potential obstacles to their implementation. Third, while WPA feels that biometrics is an absolute necessity, we insist it must be part of a larger reform initiative, which must include, at a minimum, a clean voters list and an impartial GCOM machinery. It is a case of all or nothing. WPA feels that there is still enough time to put the reforms in place before the next election. Time constraints should not be used as an obstacle to free and fair elections. We note Vice President Jack Deo's public instruction to GCOM to put preparations in place by next August. The Vice President is out of order. He is implicitly instructing GCOM to stick to his agenda rather than to ensure a credible and efficient machinery and process that can pass the test of a free and fair election. WPA will resist this bullying of GCOM. WPA calls on GCOM to exercise its constitutional autonomy and not to be bullied by the Vice President, his party, and the government. GCOM is not an arm of the PPP. Its responsibility is to the Constitution, the laws of the country, and the citizens of Guyana.
Yeah.
WPA supports all moves aimed at ensuring a fair, just, and credible process, including a delay of the elections as a last resort. We wish to remind the nation that the critical 1992 elections were delayed for almost 2 years to ensure that GCOM put in place the necessary reforms that were mandated by the all-party agreement brokered by President Jimmy Carter. For the WPA, the issue of prohibitive cost is hardly a constraint. While we do not promote wastage and binge spending, we feel that Guyana can afford the cost cited in the study. A government which spends money like a drunken sailor on its pet projects and wastes money on corrupt initiatives should not complain about spending on electoral integrity. Further, a government that is prepared to spend tens of millions on political witch hunting of GCOM personnel, but is not prepared to spend on electoral integrity is at best hypocritical. GCOM must look for the best deal, but it must ensure that there is biometrics. We have already addressed the effectiveness of the technology against factors such as power failure. So we will not expand on that here today. WPA, however, fears that GCOM is aiming to use the PPP majority to sign off against biometrics. This would be a grave error that could have far-reaching consequences. We therefore call on the Madam Chair to show impartial leadership by disentangling herself from the PPP chokehold and uphold the integrity of our office. In a partisan commission, the role of the chairperson is critical to its impartial and democratic functioning. WPA feels that Ms. Claudette Singh has failed GCOM, the Constitution, and the country in this regard. However, there is still time for her to correct the situation. Potential tampering with the list. WPA is alarmed that reports emanating from GCOM that there has been potential tampering with the voters list. We are reliably informed that the customary practice of updating the list every 6 months has been changed to monthly updates without the knowledge of the commissioners. These frequent updates increase the potential for undetected tampering. The WPA asks 2 questions which we call on GCOM to address. First, why the change to monthly or more frequent updates? Second, why were the commissioners not informed of the change? We await GCOM's response. Cash transfers. WPA is shocked at the government's intention to use the voters list as the instrument to effect the distribution of the proposed 100,000 cash handout. This is a most worrying development. The current voters list is bloated and flawed. It opens the door for electoral manipulation and fraud. To use such a list to distribute monies is equally fraught with danger and possibilities for corruption. This is unacceptable. Further, with the list now officially in the hands of the governing party, which is one of the electoral contestants, there is now no daylight between GCOM and the people. In our toxic political environment, this represents the opening of a new front for controversy. WPA notes the government announcement that it will go to the National Assembly for a supplementary withdrawal to cover the proposed $100,000 cash handout. $100,000 cash handout. This is a move in the right direction, as it allows members the opportunity to question and debate the appropriation of the funds. However, this exercise is not a substitute for legislative cover. WPA is adamant that given the amount of money that the government has spent on cash handouts to selective constituencies and the charges of corruption and political gimmickry which have ensued, there is need for necessary legislation. We insist that statutory cover would protect against corruption, improve accountability, and more importantly, integrate the cash transfers as part of a structured government intervention. Towards this end, the WPA is exploring moving to the courts for a review, a judicial review of this matter. We, however, wish to make it absolutely clear that this legal exploration and our other concerns are not intended to stand in the way of the distribution of the handout. In fact, WPA calls on the government to set a clear timeline for the distribution of the funds. We suggest a 3-month timeline beginning today, which would see the disbursement of the funds by Republic Day 2025. The sugar crisis. Since our last press conference, concerns over the state of the sugar industry have continued to engage the attention of the public. Stabroek News report on the woes at Albion Estate points to an industry in complete disarray. The woes of the industry are deeper than we have been led by the government to believe. In addition to the massive shortfall in production, the difference between cost of production and the selling price is stunning. Producing sugar at $1.31 US or $1.31 US per pound and selling at 35 cents per pound is madness. No amount of political spinning can justify losing $1 for each pound of sugar produced. WPA is also not amused by the government's silence on the matter. Jack Dio's citing of Gaisuko's autonomy is hypocritical. Nobody has been more vocal on the sugar industry than the vice president. His criminalization of the previous government's attempt to right-size the industry is well known. His haste to reopen closed estates is well known. His granting of relatively large cash handouts to sugar workers is well known. How can he now be silent on the swift decline in the fortunes of the industry over the last 4 years? Jack Dio and the government must take full responsibility for that decline. They have been the government for the last 4 years. I now turn it over to Professor Thomas for some elaboration on the issue of the sugar industry, and he would also deal with issues as they relate to energy. Professor Clive Thomas.
Okay, David, I would have, before if they had asked me questions, in case they wanted to focus on particular things, but I make a couple of comments at the outset. First, and probably most important, all the areas that we covered today are fundamental to the political future of Guyana. Decom, sugar, energy, which I'm talking a bit about, are very fundamental to the future of Guyana. None of these problems can be solved by one period of government over the statutory period that is available for any single government. They all require an inter-party agreement, a national consensus, and the structure of governance that we have in Guyana going forward. As a small country, we have a number of things to do and build, which pass through different lifetimes of different governments. And we have to recognize that as upfront. We can't turn around the sugar industry in 4 years or 5 years. We can't solve the problem of GCOM in 4 or 5 years. We can't solve the problem of energy in 4 or 5 years. It will take several governments, and governments, if they are allowed to change, will therefore have a structure where, as part of the planning for government, they are allowed to collaborate in determining the course of development. All parties to the process will be allowed to collaborate in the way forward. I think unless that is done, we will find ourselves in a situation where we have to make 4 or 5 year decisions over things that would take 20 years, for example, to construct, or even 10 years. Even if they do that, it's still only half the lifetime of the construction period. So you need to have some foresight built into the process of governance. And I think that we should advance that position in our manifesto. It has been discussed. We have not come to a final agreement on it. But I think this should be our position, so that there's a collective political responsibility on the direction, form, shape, and pattern of performance on certain sectors of our life, areas of our life. And I think all three of these stand out as examples. I don't think the sugar industry can go forward without another sugar commission to set the standard where all parties agree the direction which it will go. The same thing can be said for energy. We have these stopgap measures on energy. We have billions of dollars spent. I think you're getting generators from Honduras. They haven't even been installed years after. We spend money and waste money hopelessly in these attempts to find short-period fixes to what is a secular or long-term problem. And we have to get out of that cycle. We can't get out of it if it's driven only by politics. By politics, I mean a narrow party politics of the period. So I think that part of our manifesto should be a drive to sort of nationalize these efforts so that we work within a system of governance that makes sure that the performance and the capabilities of these sectors are always at the level that is desired by the country. Because when they don't work, they affect the national workings of the economy. The national political process depends on GCOM. It will never move forward unless GCOM is fixed. The national agricultural system, the basic framework under which we were developing before oil, will never be fixed unless we solve the problems with sugar. The same thing can be said for oil and gas. Our future, the possibilities of universal basic incomes, and all those things depend heavily on our ability to ensure that we take collective decisions on the use of the windfall. These don't have to go to the minutiae of actual government, day-to-day government, but certainly aligning the strategic plans going forward should be a collective responsibility of the political process in Guyana. And I think that we should support that recommendation. And I would point out at the press conference for public hearing. I don't know if any other further details you want me to add.
We're not hearing you, Kidaki.
Hi, good morning. Svetlana Marshall from News Source. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Dr. Hines, you spoke about the need for not only biometrics, but also a clean voters list. If the list is clean, if there's a fresh list generated, maybe by the creation or the move of a new legislation, is it absolutely necessary that you have the two? I know the opposition would have been calling for several years now for a clean voters list. So if the parliament moves to have that done, is it absolutely necessary? And if so, why to have biometrics in place before the next elections?
Thanks for the question, Svetlana, and it's quite an instructive question because our call for biometric, as you have alluded to, is based on the fact that the voters list itself allows for voter impersonation, and so if we were to clean the voters list, a brand new voters list by house registration, then that narrows the possibility for voter impersonation. But we would also like to point to what the commissioners at GCOM and I dare say some of the observers the human element in all of this, so that you can have a clean voters list, but the human element can reach for manipulation still. And so a clean voters list with biometrics would be foolproof, well, almost foolproof, and to ensure that we cover as many bases as possible to ensure that there is little or no room for manipulation.
You also said the WPA is not opposed to, as a last resort, having the elections delayed. By how long, like how many months, a year, 2 years? You referenced to 1992. What is a reasonable timeline, given what the opposition is asking for, clean voters lists, GCOM to be a professional organization, suggesting that, it's has a lot of work to do on that part, and biometrics. Given all of those demands, what is a reasonable timeline you would say for there to be national and regional elections?
Well, we would be guided by GCOM and GCOM's timeline, but we wouldn't want the elections, the delay, if it comes to that, we wouldn't want the delay to go beyond, let's say, a year. That would be too much. We are hoping that there is no need for a delay, but if as a short delay would allow for all the doubts, all the possibilities for manipulation to be taken care of, we are prepared to support that delay. We think a delay over a year would be too much. But in the end, we would be guided by GCOM's timeline.
And within that period, do you think that's sufficient time to have constitutional reform? Because I know their constitutional reform commission has been formed, but do you think there is enough time to, because in the ruling, the High Court ruling that is often referenced to with respect to the voters list and the issue of residency, in order for that to be changed, I think there has to be some kind of constitutional reform. Do you think that is also sufficient time?
Well, I don't think we need to get as far as constitutional reform, certainly not now. What the National Assembly needs to do is to pass statutory laws to ensure that we are able to extract those who are overseas, dead overseas, and all of that kind of stuff from the voters list. That is, to have a voters list that does not violate the representation of the people act, that and the Constitution that says, and the court ruling that says we cannot remove people's name from the National Register's list. And so in order to get a voters list done properly without going against the ruling of the court, we have to go to the National Assembly for them to pass legislation to enable us to do that. And that can be done in short order. I think that can be done, we think that can be done before the next election. All it takes is for the Attorney General to take a bill before the Parliament, and the opposition, the parliamentary opposition, have already said that they are prepared to support such legislation to ensure that there is a proper and clean voters list. So I don't think we need to move as far as constitutional reform.
My final question is to Dr. Thomas, Clive Thomas.
Yeah.
I know the Commission of Inquiry had recommended that privatization in part of the sugar industry. Do you think that, given the challenges the industry is facing now, a significant drop in production, the inability to generate profit as they should, that government should act on those recommendations to have the industry in part privatized and address the issue of divestment and so forth?
Well, privatization is really an invitation to investors to invest. And it depends on the response you get. It's not a predetermined thing. We didn't get a large number of investors needed to invest in cane, but we had a few investors who were particularly important in trying to diversify the assets we had to produce other things, not cane necessarily. Fish farming, for example, we had a number of firms from Florida, consultants from Florida, who came to advise us on that. We had people in tourism who were advising us on the conversion of the industry into some element of agricultural tourism, aspects of it, using the estate as showpieces and offering opportunities for rental of lands and houses available in the estate for people who either would want to go camping or rent a property as it is. So there are a number of things that are involved here. But the commission of inquiry that I attended when the PNC government, APNU government came into power, did go into all the aspects of the industry and wrote a very large and important report. And we were trying to use that as a basis when I was chairman for the diversification of the industry. But that takes time and we weren't able to complete the task by any means. That is why I was recommending that some things that we have to necessarily do in Ghana require multi-party agreement. Because if the government that fails to do a task that might take or should take 20 years to do, if it doesn't do it in 5, it will be criticized, and probably rightly so. And so no government wants to be able to leave their period of office not fulfilling these tasks. But they get criticized now for leaving barges and production of energy mills lying on the ground and nobody using them, not even being able sometimes to fulfill the delivery of the items that they bought overseas, which looks extraordinarily scandalous.
Thank you.
But you see, there's a sort of participation has to be continuous. So you may have an elected government and they have the responsibilities that all governments do, but you also have an inter-party regulatory system where the parties agree a priori as a condition of the country, a requirement for the country, that they will cooperate in certain areas, as many countries do. Some of them emphasize in the areas of defense, foreign policy. But in Ghana, it has to go further than that because we're too small and we have too many absolutely large things that require time to put in place. One thing governments don't have a lot of is time. Certainly not guaranteed time. I hope that answers your point.
Yes, Dr. Thomas, thank you so much.
Yes, but
Hello, good morning, gentlemen. Mark DaCosta, Village Voice News. Can you hear
Yes.
me? Right?
yeah, I can hear.
Yes, we can.
Dr. Hines, I have a question for you, sir. In your initial presentation, at the beginning of this press conference, you made a statement, GCOM is not an arm of the PUP. Later in your statement, you made several points, and then subsequently you said, based on those points, that there is no daylight between GCOM and the PUP. I'm thinking that probably in the first instance, when you said the GCOM is not an arm of the PUP, that may be interpreted generally as you making the point that legislatively and so forth, GCOM is autonomous and not connected with the ruling or any other party. And the second point, when you said there is no daylight between there is now no daylight between GCOM and the PUP, you would have been making a reference to a practical situation that now exists. Would you clarify whether that interpretation is correct? And secondly, if that interpretation is correct, then in what way would the PUP have overstepped the legislative and other regulatory bounds so that GCOM is now effectively, there's no daylight between the two, in your words, sir?
Well, if you remember, I said that the use by the government of the voters list to distribute the cash handout is unacceptable. The government, the ruling party via the government, is now in possession, officially in possession of the voters list. Our party is not in possession of the voters list. The PNC, APNU, AFC, they are not officially in possession of the voters list. One party is in possession of the voters list, and God knows what they will do with that voters list. And so it is against that background that we said there's now no daylight between the GCOM and the PPP.
Can walk and chew gum at the same time.
That's right. Does that answer your question, Mark?
Yes, Dr. Hines, it does. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
We're not hearing you, Kidaki. No, we weren't hearing you at all.
Just one follow, so one other question, Kadaki, if you may allow me to do so. I know last week you mentioned, Dr. Hines, you spoke about the need for coalition to be in place, a joint opposition to be in place. I heard the leader of the PNC said that the AFC leader, he would be meeting with the AFC leader soon. Could you say if another meeting is planned with you and AFC or APNU to really discuss a possible coalition as was done in 2015?
No, we have not been asked to have any official meeting with either the PNC or /APNU or the AFC. As I pointed out last week, we are in constant communication with the leader of the PNC. And so therefore, we would have from time to time talked about the possibility of the WPA getting back into the APNU. But there has not been any kind of formal meeting between the two sides. However, this past week, the joint opposition parties, meaning the leader of the PNC, APNU, the leader of the AFC, and myself as co-leader of the WPA, we had a meeting with the GCOM commissioners who were nominated by the opposition as they briefed us on developments at GCOM. Subsequent to that meeting, we collaborated, the three parties, in putting out a joint statement on the state of affairs at GCOM. And you will notice that joint statement went out as the joint opposition parties. We have agreed that we would meet as often as we can to monitoring what is happening at GCOM. So that's a new development, that the three parties are cooperating in ensuring that we have the electoral reforms that we have been clamoring for. But beyond that, there has been no meeting, no proposed meeting between the WPA and the other two parties. We, however, welcome the development of the meeting between Mr. Hughes and Mr. Norton. We think that that is a way forward as far as putting together a coalition, potentially putting together a coalition before the next election. From our observances, we feel that the support base of the opposition are clamoring for a coalition of the three parties. So the announcement of that meeting, I think, will go a long way towards easing some of the fears that there may not be an all-party, all-opposition coalition going into the elections. WPA welcomes that development for what it's worth.
Dr. Hines, oftentimes when we hear about the opposition, references made to the PNC, APNU, AFC, WPA. What about the other parties that managed to amass enough votes to secure at least one seat, secure a seat in the National Assembly during the last elections? Do you think greater emphasis should be made to consult those parties to see if they're willing to join in on a coalition?
Yes, I think that would be desirable. I know Anoga says they have no interest in joining an all opposition. They're very clear about that. Some of the other parties I don't think exist. Anog, we know, is active of the other so-called new parties, and they've made it very clear that that they are not interested in entering a coalition with either the APNU, AFC, WPA, or the PPP. But we would not stand in the way of consulting other parties who may be interested in joining an all-opposition coalition. Hello and good evening and welcome to this evening's edition of Politics 101. We, of course, we were playing there the WPA press conference earlier today. As you would have noted, the WPA has now begun to hold weekly press conferences every Monday at 11 o'clock. And that has led to some more coverage and visibility for the party, especially in the conventional media. As you heard there, we discussed the state of GCOM. And I think we are getting to the point where we have to lay down the marker. And that is that there can really be no credible election without a new brand voters list, biometrics, and an impartial GCOM. And I think we must not budge on those three things. Now, we're not ready to say if we don't get those things, we're not going into an election. We are positive that we will have to get those things. Because if we go into an election, and at the end of the election, one or the other party, major party or major group, does not accept the results, we're playing with trouble. We are playing with trouble. So if you force the opposition to go into an election that does not fit the bill of being free and fair, if you force us to go into that election against our will, and we go into that election and the results reflect manipulation because of the state of the electoral machinery, then our supporters would obviously not accept those results. So it means that we have to do everything. We have to get biometrics. We have to get a clean voters list and an impartial GCOM. And we have to up the ante tomorrow. There's going to be a demonstration in front of GCOM. If you are in Georgetown or nearby, please go out and join that demonstration. But we have to push. Jack Dio said that finally, after pushing back, he said that he's not opposed to biometrics. All right, so far so good. But in addition to biometrics, we have to have a clean list. The clean list is the basis for any credible election, And we cannot continue with a GCOM where the GCOM chair is acting like a PPP commissioner. We have to meet the point where she does not change course, then we will have no choice than to clamor for her to vacate that seat. So we're up in the ante at GCOM. Clearly, the PPP is on the back foot. We are hearing that the census shows the PPP's base, meaning Indo-Guyanese, make up about 36% of the population. The Amerindian section of the population we are hearing has grown. We are hearing that the African Guyanese section has remained steady at around 30%, and that the mixed section has gone up. And we know that a lot of the people who consider themselves mixed really vote along with African Guyanese. So it is clear that the PPP is in trouble as far as believing that they have a built-in majority. That is no longer there. And they're doing everything. As you heard in the press conference this morning, that we have now learned that previously, as House registration is going on, not House, continuous registration, is going on. As they get the data, every 6 months, they will update the list. Recently, our commissioners found out that they're now updating, quote unquote, updating the list every month. They move from every 6 months to every month. And what is worse, is that they never informed the commissioners. The commissioners only found this out by chance. And when they ask why the change and why they were not informed, they could give no credible answer. Now, if you are going into that list, that database for that list, as regularly as they're now going in, there's a lot you can do. You can put names into that list without it being detected easily. So while you put in names of people who are legitimately registering in the continuous registration, you can also put other names there to pad the list even more. And we know that the people who are manning the list are they're partial to the PPP. They're partial to the PPP. So they've opened up another front for manipulation. That is why that list is not just about cleansing that list. We have to do away with that list. That list is stink, rotten. And we have to have a brand new list through house-to-house registration. If you remember before the last election, they had started the house-to-house registration. And then they stopped it, saying that there's not enough time to finish house-to-house registration in time for the election. They went to court and stopped it. That is why the WPA is saying, look, if it means extending the election, the time for the election, a couple of months so that we can have house-to-house registration, we are prepared to support that. Because the PPP is doing everything to rig this election. Everything. And ultimately, the elections will be rigged through GCOM. And that is why it's important that we keep our eyes on GCOM like a hawk. And we have to make it very clear. We are not begging for a new voters list. We are not begging for biometrics. We are demanding them. And we are saying that there'll be consequences for the election if we do not get the kind of guarantee that the elections will be free and fair. We have to make that very clear. And so the Working People's Alliance joins with the other political parties in the opposition in saying that as we prepare for elections and as we prepare to win those elections, we are equally prepared to ensure that the playing field is level so that we are competing, not at a disadvantage, but we are competing on a level playing field. So we're upping the ante. And we are saying this is no longer a matter of if or but. It's a matter that we have to have it. We have to have those things for elections. The other thing you heard there is that the government has asked for the voters list to use it to distribute handouts. No, we are hearing that the voters list, well, not hearing, we know that the present voters list is over 700,000. So, if that list is flawed, if that list is bloated, as the PPP itself admits, then how you're going to use a flawed and bloated list to distribute this cash handout? It means, therefore, that just as how you use the extra people on the voters list to engage in fraud at the elections, then you'll be using it to engage in corruption in the distribution. Now, the extra names on the list are mostly people who live overseas. Some of them have died overseas, and there's no record to show that they've died. Now, if you're using that list of 700,000, and the actual adult population in Guyana is 400,000, 500,000, then you have over 200,000 extra people named on the list. That's potentially $200,000, $100,000 that is going to go in somebody's pocket. we are reliably informed that they can get a proper distribution list from other institutions of government. Why go to the voters list? The voters list is for elections. The voters list is not for distribution of money. Why are you mixing elections with the distribution of this money? When the WPA said 3 weeks ago that this cash handout is for voters, it is that we had in mind, that they were going to use this cash handout as part of the voter manipulation. Now they're in possession of the voters list. They alone. God knows when they go through that list, they will be able to have a sense of the list that the other parties don't necessarily have. So they are doing everything. So you all are seeing that this cash handout is not for real. The cash handout is a means towards the end of rigging the election. It's coming out every day. That is why the WPA said, look, as flawed as that cash handout is, you have announced it, get going with it. And we are saying you must give us a timeline. And WPA suggested a 3-month timeline. So that by Republic Day next year, people must get the money. Because they're not interested in giving the citizens the money to help with their well-being. Because if they were, they would say, okay, we'll try to get the money in time for Christmas so that you all can have a couple more dollars to go and, do your Christmas shopping. No. They're not interested in that. If they can prolong the distribution of this thing to nearer election day, I am sure that they would do it. WPA says, give us a timeline. 3 months is enough time, and begin to distribute the people's money that you promised. We are also saying, and we said that at the press conference this morning, we are also saying that those young people below 18 who have families, those young people should get this $100,000. They are perhaps the most vulnerable section of our population. These are young people. They may have made mistakes. Teenage pregnancy is not something people go looking for. It may be part of, cultural customs that, people have children younger, whatever it is. It is the responsibility of the state to protect and look after the welfare of those young people. And you cannot say that you are distributing oil money to help people and you are leaving out a large section of the population, a large and most vulnerable section. And so WPA is saying, call our bluff. You are saying that you are interested in helping people. Well, call our bluff and include those young people below age 18, especially those who have children and who have family of their own. It is criminal that the most vulnerable section is being left out. WPA has no problems with overseas Guyanese. We don't. But if we have a choice between giving that $100,000 to overseas Guyanese or giving them to young people, young parents below the age of 18, we will give it to those young parents below the age of 18. In any case, the Guyanese overseas, the majority of them is not going to come home. Some of them will come home. those who the PPP are bringing home, and to use the collection of that cash handout as a means of getting their ID cards so that they can use it on election day for vote impersonation. But the vast majority of Guyanese overseas not going to be home. Where is that money going? And so we are saying government must act. Put your mouth where the money is. Because you are saying you care so much for Guyanese. Well, the people who are most vulnerable are those young people. Call WPA's bluff and give them one way to start is that instead of saying you have to be 18 on the 1st of January 2023 or 2024, we are saying that it must be given to all Guyanese who turn 18 on or before December 31st, 2025. If you do that, you are going to be able to bring in some of those young people with families. You're not going to be able to capture all of them, but you're going to be able to capture some of them. So the best case scenario is to include, probably reduce it now to, 15, 16 years, whatever they do. But they can go to the census, and the census will tell them how many of these young families, young people, they are who are families. They can go to the census and get that information. But these young people cannot be left out. You're giving a little small piece, and you're saying you care, yet those who need the care most, you're leaving them out. WPA says we are not leaving them out. And we are saying extend the net to include them, even if it means rescinding your promise that you will give it to overseas people. So we have thrown that challenge out. Sisters and brothers, we have to be proactive, and we have to ensure that we cover all bases. For us in the WPA, the questionnaire is not primarily your votes. Ultimately, we would glad for you to vote for WPA or vote for whatever coalition we are part of, ultimately. But our interest in cash transfer is not first an interest in vote. It's an interest in ending poverty. I was born in poverty. So many of us here were born in poverty. Some of us got out of extreme poverty a little bit earlier than others. But all of us were born in poverty. And all of us know that poverty is hell. Poverty is hell. All of us know stories about what our people, young women in particular, have to go through because of poverty. Young people, young women are forced to trade their pride, to trade their dignity in order to survive. And so our objective is to end poverty. End poverty. We feel if we end poverty, there's so much else that we're going to correct. If we end poverty, then we are giving our young people a chance to go to school. School dropout is about 50%. A child starts Form 1. By then they get to write exam in Form 5. Half of them drop out. And so when we are talking about how well we do at exams, we are forgetting that we are talking about only a subset of our young people. School dropout is a major problem. If you're going to reform education, we have to deal with school dropout. And so if we're able to reduce poverty, then we open up the possibility for more of our young people staying in school. A lot of our young people are dropping out of school because they have to help the family go on the road and sell, etc., etc. Some of them are dropping out because the parents are gone at night, or women have to go and do watchman work. Leave young children, young girl children. You left them and gone during the day, they don't go to school and you don't know. So we feel that if we are able to deal with the question of poverty, we give our young people a chance. We are talking about university, free education for university. We welcome it. It's long overdue. But the very poor people are not going to be able to take advantage of that free education. Because the people who are going to be first admitted to UG are those who get plenty subject. And those who don't have plenty subjects, even if they're in school because the parents are not able to afford the plenty subjects, or because they don't have the kind of support to help them to get plenty subject, whatever it is, if you have 5 subjects C, XC, or whatever the name of the exams they do now, you are competing to get into UG with people who have 15 subjects and 10 subjects. And so you are not able to benefit from UG. If we get poverty out of the way, if we reduce and ultimately alleviate poverty, then we are giving poor people children an equal chance, an equal opportunity. We used to in the old days talk about equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. Now we have to talk about equality of condition. And there is no equality of condition. No equality of condition. The child who doesn't have access to internet at home does not have the same equal condition as the child who has access to internet. A lot of the homework now is online, internet. A few years ago, Coffee 250 did an experiment with what we call homework centers. Because we recognized that there were children who were coming home in the afternoon, parents are not home to help them with their homework. And homework make up for almost 50% of their grades. And so we set up these homework centers. Well, we had one there, I think, in Stanley Town on the West Bank. And we said, look, the children get out from school. Instead of going home, you come to the homework center. And you have tutors there. They're not there to do your homework for you. They're there to supervise you and to make sure you get your homework done. And we got reports from teachers on the West Bank that they saw a marked improvement in the performance of those children that took advantage of that homework center. We eventually had to close it down because we couldn't raise the funds to keep it open because we needed to give the tutors a little stipend. A lot of the tutors were young people, young university students who weren't working, or retired teachers. And so we would give them a stipend. And it went on for almost 2 years, but we couldn't sustain it. And we are saying, if we can do homework centers throughout the country, that's another way of reducing school dropout and helping with performance in school. So poverty, getting rid of poverty is vital. WPA will be running on that. We can promise all other things. And there are other areas of our economy or political economy that are important. But we feel poverty, if you get rid of poverty, you solve some other problems or begin to solve those problems. And so we are campaigning on ending poverty. We are campaigning on ending poverty. It's a scourge. It's a scourge. And often what happens is those who are victims of poverty, we end up blaming them. I saw some PPP supporters shamelessly saying that people who are impoverished do it on themselves. They're lazy, they're stupid, they're this, they're that. So we have a lot of work to do. The WPA is upping the ante. Somebody called me this weekend to tell me that some overseas people are in Guyana and they're doing polls. Apparently, a lot of these things are occurring. And somebody associated with one of the polls called me to say that the WPA polled this past month at 6.7%. And that 51% of the population recognize the name WPA, 49% doesn't recognize the name WPA. So with a 51% name recognition, according to that poll, they're saying that we are somewhere about 6 to 7%. Polls are what they are, and one doesn't put store on them. But when they first began to poll WPA about 2 months ago, we came in at 1%. And they're saying now that we are close to 6% or 7%. I am just saying that not to say to you that because polls are, even if those polls are authentic, it's really a snapshot in time. But it tells you something, that the more we are out here, the more we continue to get our views across, the more people will respond. And we are not here to split votes. We are here to consolidate votes. We are not here to split opposition votes. We are here to what? Consolidate opposition votes. By the way, although the WPA had, they say, just a 51% name recognition, its presidential candidate, according to the poll, has a name recognition of 77%. So what those who didn't know of the party knows of the party's co-leader or presidential candidate, right? So you all have to help us. You all have to help us. Help us to get the word out. Help us to get our views out there. We are thankful for the press coverage that we have been getting in the last couple of weeks since we have started holding press conferences. We are grateful because it helps to get our message out there. But you all can help us. You all can help us. While I'm at it, let me just thank two lovely souls, Natalie, and Linda, who each month continues to send their little donations in. I don't like the idea of begging you all for donation because I think it gets in the way of the work that we have to do. But, you know, you all, this work calls for funding, money, and so on. And we know that you all are not big and rich, but you know, $10 or $20 or $25, you know, you multiply that by 20, you multiply it by 30, it helps us to pay the bills, it helps us to to help in getting our word out, to go into communities and so on and so forth, you know. So I am making that appeal to you all, to you know, slip in a little donation here and there, you know. It's not mandatory, but it's necessary for us to continue to do the work and to continue to get out there and let our voices be heard. We have something to offer Guyana. We have something to offer Guyana. One of my teachers, texted me 2 nights ago and said, well, you know, finally, it's good to know that you have been promoted from executive member to co-leader and presidential candidate. And I can't wait to cast my vote for my student. I make that point, I give that anecdote to say that we have to learn the lesson that politics is also about the personal. Politics is also about connecting to people in their natural habitat. As I said, as you all know, I from a village that is a very Russian village. If those of you all old people know what Russian is, they're very Russian people, and in their own way, they have encouraged people like myself, encouraged us by pushing me to stop being shy and step forward. And we are doing that in small ways. We could do a better job at it, but we are doing that in small ways. But we need your support. If a pollster calls you and your preference is in WPA, let them know your preference is in WPA. One thing you all are certain is that in making WPA your first stop, we will take your vote and your preference into a larger coalition because we want to win. We want to win. So your vote or your preference to the WPA or the PNC or the AFC is really a first stop. Because by God's grace, if we go in as a coalition, all the votes go the same place. But what you will be doing is that you will be helping the WPA to raise its profile. To raise its profile. And that is extremely important. We are not about the business of splitting votes. Let me make that absolutely clear. We would rather not be part of the process today rather than be part of it to split up opposition votes. But we also want to be able to identify our supporters, whether it's 5%, 6%, 7%, whatever it is. We want to identify our supporters and to use our supporters, to use that support in order to give us a louder voice. So I want to thank those of you who have expressed support for us, who have expressed confidence in us, and we are saying that we want to use that support and that confidence to make Guyana a better place, to make Guyana a better place, to make poor people, to take them out of poverty, and to unlock their energies so they can do more for themselves. And in doing more for themselves, to do more for their communities, to give themselves a chance and to give their children chances that they never had. That is the objective of the Working People's Alliance. So please continue to support us. Please continue to push us. Please continue to give us the confidence that we need. Again, thank you, Linda, my countrywoman, and Auntie Natalie, who continue to send their monthly donations. That's two beautiful souls. I know we don't spend a lot of time soliciting donations, and so it's easy to forget. But I'm reminding you all. You all know all the digits and all that thing to where you have to send the cash app and so on and so forth. I'm looking for it here.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.
Oh yes, and for those of you who are in Guyana, I think we do have this MMG story. I'm looking for the information here. I don't seem to have it here at my fingertips. I know it's somewhere here, but please send us your donation. Tomorrow night, Dr. Henry Jeffrey is going to be here. And you know that when Dr. Jeffrey comes on, it's going to be sparks. It's going to be sparks. So until tomorrow night, I say good night and love as always. Love as always. Without your love and our love, we're not going to get this thing done. Good night until tomorrow night.